The sun bled into the Afghan mountains, staining the jagged peaks orange as the Jericho missile test roared to life. Tony Stark stood in the desert, tailored suit jacket swaying in the hot wind, sunglasses catching the gleam of his own destruction like polished mirrors. The explosion rolled across the range, flattening the horizon in a wave of fire and dust. He turned to the soldiers and journalists, arms spread as if he had just performed a magic trick rather than a weapons demonstration. Moments later, in the back of a Humvee, he sipped from a glass of whiskey and cracked jokes that dripped with casual arrogance. That was when the desert opened its jaws. A Stark missile, his missile, struck the convoy road, flipping the Humvee like a toy. The impact tore his world into white light and ringing silence. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was his company's logo spinning on shrapnel, burning against the sand. When Tony woke, it wasn't to the smell of sand and gunpowder, but to the briny stench of seawater. He was lying on a metal cot in a half-flooded cavern, the water lapping at his ankles. Above him, hanging from the jagged rock wall, was the enormous skull of a walrus, tusks gleaming in the dim light. A man stood beside the bed, lean and sunburned, wearing a tattered fisherman's coat. His eyes were unnervingly wide, the kind of stare you might see in someone who had been left alone with the ocean for far too long. He introduced himself as Howard Bright and claimed to have saved Tony from the abyss. The magnet strapped to Tony's chest was humming, its crude wiring keeping shrapnel from burrowing into his heart. Lurking behind Bright were armed 10-ring soldiers, crates of Stark Industries weapons stacked at their feet. They gave their orders plainly: build them a Jericho missile or die here. Yinsen was there too, quiet and deliberate, tending to Tony's wounds. Bright, however, had other ideas. Bright spoke often and always of the sea. He told Tony about the months he had been stranded in the open ocean, how the only thing that kept him alive was the companionship of a walrus he called Mr. Tusk. The animal, he said, circled him every day, protected him from sharks, and never abandoned him. The walrus's nature's tank, Bright insisted, gesturing to the skull on the wall. Fearless, loyal, unbreakable. Men are cruel. The walrus is pure. Tony dismissed it at first, chalking Bright's fixation up to saltwater madness, but the fisherman hovered over him like a vulture over a wounded animal, and the sermons kept coming. When Tony began sketching an armored suit to escape, Bright leaned over and drew 2 massive tusks jutting from the arms. If you must flee, he said, flee with purpose, flee like the walrus. Tony stared at the drawing for a long beat before muttering, fine, you want tusks? You'll get tusks. Over the following days, Tony and Yinsen worked in secret, scavenging Stark missile parts to create something entirely different, the Mark Tusk I. It was a hulking, inelegant slab of steel and hydraulics, its arms fitted with piston-powered tusk rams, capable of punching through armor plating. The helmet was angular, crowned with 2 ivory spikes that glowed in the shadows. Every plate of the suit was riveted like the hide of a walrus, overbuilt and unapologetically absurd. On the day the 10 rings came for their missile, the Mark Tusk I emerged instead, stomping into the flooded chamber like an armored beast. The first guard was skewered and flung into the wall. The second was knocked into a crate of ammunition, which exploded in a flash of steam. Bullets rattled against the plating as Tony forced his way toward the exit, Yinsen buying time with his life. When Tony finally burst into daylight, he fired the crude thrusters, rocketing over the sand dunes before crashing spectacularly into the desert. The suit came apart around him like a shedding shell, leaving him sprawled in the sand, staring up at the vast, empty sky. Back in the United States, Tony announced that Stark Industries would no longer sell weapons, but the footage of his bizarre cave armor went viral. The internet christened him Iron Tusk, plastering Tusk memes across every corner of the web. Ignoring the ridicule, Tony retreated to his workshop to build a refined version, the Mark Tusk Sectu. Sleeker, faster, and still tusked, it came with aquatic thrusters, sonar systems, and upgraded rams. His first mission took him back to Afghanistan, where he dismantled a 10 Rings outpost in a flurry of Tusk strikes and belly slides. The footage only made the memes worse, but it also made him a hero. Obadiah Stane saw an opportunity. While praising Tony in public, he recovered fragments of the original Mark Tusk 1 and commissioned his own suit, the Anti-Tusk. Armed with harpoons, sonar jammers, and a cryo cannon designed to counter Tony's aquatic edge. The two finally clashed at the Stark Industries docks, steel meeting steel in a brutal exchange that spilled into the bay. Underwater, Tony tethered the Anti-Tusk to a derelict freighter, overloaded his tusks, and dragged Obadiah to the surface. On the Stark rooftop, Pepper overloaded the arc reactor, blasting the Anti-Tusk into unconsciousness and hurling Tony into a swimming pool. The next day, at a press conference, Tony was asked the question the internet had been screaming for weeks: "Are you Iron Man or Iron Tusk?" He looked straight into the camera, smirked, and said, "Why not both?" Somewhere, in a lab not far away, Justin Hammer watched the clip, typed Walrus armor patents into a search bar, and grinned.